This is part 2 of my story time on how holding energetic frequencies can change the world. So if we take this micro example that happened in my small town and apply it to the other echelons of corruption that we're dealing with here, right? So like, obviously, this is not a political group, but I also think that the personal is political, right? Personally, I'm not a political person. It's only because there is not a fit way for democracy to happen anymore. That's a whole other conversation. That's a different subreddit, right? Like, that's not for here. The view that we all have in common is that the frequency of unconditional love should be held for as long as possible by as many people as possible, whilst understanding that we are all human and that is actually quite hard. So we're not spiritual bypassing, we are following the guidance of Thoth. So therefore, we can all agree that no matter what our opinions are, anything that isn't love needs to change. So you can think of any example of something that's happening on a global scale now that isn't love that needs to change. I think we could probably all agree that massacres shouldn't happen, right? So how do these things relate? Well, don't think about things that hold the same energy as being separate. This is what Thoth is telling us. If you are holding the energy of corruption and silence for corruption, corruption is based on fear. It's an ecosystem that is based on fear, okay? You hold that energy, you have your excuse. Well, I just had to collect my paycheck, right? Fine. But know that you're holding the energy of corruption, okay? And then you turn on the news and you say, there's corruption happening. That's not good. I want that to change. Well, great. But down here, you were laying the foundations for the corruption because you were holding the energy. And then the people above you were holding the energy, and it gets bigger and bigger and more amplified and more amplified. Then what do you have? You have a system that is in some way endorsing a massacre in a foreign country. And that's how it happens. We could talk about this all day, so I won't. You get the picture. Then you have the example of what happened in the yoga studio, okay? Whether or not there should be panic at the disco is quite frankly up for debate. Now, when you ask the question, should there be consent in a yoga studio? The answer is a resounding yes. That's also an interesting example because the consent violations were perpetrated by someone who had a track record of abuse in another space that they were then bringing to this public space to make it impossible for safety to happen in that space. That's clear. The reason why that was possible is because when it first happened, no one said, hey, wait a second, that's not acceptable. Don't do that. Speaking out. Then everyone held that energy of silence. And then they were in denial about it. You know, they created the ecosystem that made it happen. That's a spiritual thing. Interesting because the person that had control over that space and could have stopped it whenever they wanted actually had adverse experiences in relationships themselves. But they didn't apply that to how they should be running their business. Instead, they went into their own ego. And this is someone who listens to Ram Dass and listens to Bashar channels, right? You can do all of the spiritual things, but not do the real work. Not do the real inner work that you need to do to hold the frequency of unconditional love in a genuine way. This is courageous work. It's very difficult work. You all understand that every single thing I teach, Thoth makes me do it myself. So I'm sitting here doing my own shadow work this afternoon. Of course. Come and join us on Reddit, r/revolutionisspiritual.